Hi everyone, welcome to this tutorial series using Autodesk Advanced Steel 2019. Today I'm going to show you how to add a haunch connection between the column and the rafter section. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my Home tab and then activate my connection vault. So this will launch the connection vault where I can activate and select all the different connections in Advanced Steel. And I'm going to look at the column to beam tab, and the one at the top we've got eaves, haunch to flange. A little tip, because we're going to start connecting multiple beams together, is to enable the little fly out, and that will tell you what the selection order is. So it'll show a little profile and it will show you the selection order is 1 column and 2 beam. So that means that I must select the column first, then the beam. So the way that it works is I select the command line will tell me to select the objects, and I use the please identify column. So this is going to be the column. I then right click to confirm selection, then identify the rafter. I then select the rafter and I then right click. And as with all Advanced Steel connections, once I right click it will activate the connection box dialog. So what we have in here is the properties tab. We can have a look. You'll see that the only connection and the only type available within it is the eaves, haunch to flange. We also have our library tab where we can save our defaults, and we also have a joint design option. If we come down into the general tab, we can start to look at and configure the actual size of the physical haunch, and you can see we can control the profile and see the value number 1, and if I set that value, let's say to 450, click enter, you see that it will start to increase the size of the haunch. And then the depth is controlled at the minute from the bottom of the rafter, so I can set that to 250. You can adjust these, so you can go from the length from the end plate face, or you can go from the column flange, the column center line, or the length and slope. And then on the depth we can go from the rafter top, so we could say that is 750 and it will control it that way. We can go from the rafter center line, rafter depth at bottom, single cut, or the depth. So if I use the single cut option, it will do something like that. And we can also control the chamfer finish. So if I set those at 25mm chamfer, it will actually chamfer the little section in there. So I'm going to set that, let's say, to 20. And that will control the size of the haunch. So I can make that a little bit bigger to something like that. Then we can start to look at whether we require any additional plates. So if we click this on, it will apply a little stiffener plate on the bottom side where I can control, and I can also put one at the haunch end as well. So if we set the thickness, that was 10, width 100, and the height 50, you'll see that it will place a little stiffener plate in that location. So we have the ability to do that. We also have the ability to add on an additional rafter, and that will add it on, you'll see by the image. So if I create an additional section, I can then go in, specify UB, and then we can choose a particular type, and then you can choose the distance, and you can also set whether it be horizontal or not, and the distance from the top. We can start to move that up and down, so that's quite useful. And then we have an end plate, so this controls the size of the end plate. So you can see the thickness is 20, if we change it to 50, you see what happens. We can put in erection tolerance, so it'll actually put in the gap between there, but I'm going to set that back to 0. And then we have the length type, so this calculates the value from the top or the bottom, or we can go using a projection, and we can actually project it 50mm above, or we say 0, it will do it flush at the top of the rafter. And then the projection at the bottom, if we set that, say, to 500, you see it goes 500 below. Now let's take that up to 250. You'll see if we go 50mm below. The width, I can go with an exact value, or I can actually go on projection, and then if we set the values to 0 and 0, it will do it the exact same width as our rafter section. So I'm going to go with something like that. Probably just project it 20 millimeters at the bottom and maybe just 20 at the top, just so we get a reasonable size plate in position. If we want to work with a cap plate, you can tick off this section that says column not trimmed. So when it is trimmed, it will do horizontal. When it's not trimmed, we can then choose whether we want a half plate, full plate, or we can actually specify a value. But if we go with a full plate, we can then control the plate thickness, the width, the gap. So if we said the plate width was 150, you will see that I can control do that. And then the plate gap allows for the little tolerance there, so if there's a plate gap in that section, it reduces it back. If we want this to be horizontal, we can click the tick and then we can use a column extension, so we can actually extend it up above. So I'm just going to extend it up 100, and we'll probably stick with that. So we can then start looking at the bolts. So I'm just going to spin this round and we start looking at the bolts and welds. So the first things first, we can actually set the size of the bolt. So we can say 16 and go XOX, and we can choose the grade on the assembly. So if we wanted to go to a tapered, so we just go with the standard, and the distance to the previous bolt. So that's we can start to specify if the bolts are on gauge line. So if they're on gauge line, they actually move in where they should be in line with the column. So I'm going to go with something like that. And the number per side, if we set that to 2, we can obviously double up. Again, in this instance, I'm going to go with 1 bolt. So that lines the bolts up correctly. And then we look at the bolt groups. So this controls how the bolts are grouped. So if we go with 3, it will do a group of 3, 1, 2, 3 at the top. And then I can obviously control the intermediate distance. So if we say 75, 75, 75. And then if we go to the second group, and I also add 3 in there, it will put 3 bolts in here. And again, I'm going to go the spacing between them is 75. And the start distance controls the distance between the last bolt in the first group and the next one, so I can start to control and position my bolts like that. So I've done 2 bolt groups of 3. You could add in, you could change that to 2 and it will shift them back up, but again 3 works pretty well. So 3 in the top rafter, 3 in the haunch section. That's starting to look pretty good. We can then start to look at whether we want to control the welds, so we can actually upgrade and change each individual weld at each part. You can see that you've got all the stiffener variables, the haunches. We can add in additional welds in these points, and we can also start to reinforce. So if we click on a reinforcing group 1, you'll see that it puts a little reinforcing plate behind the first set of bolts, and with each one you can then control the thickness and the length. And if we tick on group 2, again we control these things, but again not going to use that. And then we can add in if we want to put in slotted holes. So if we said we wanted to slot the plate, so we orbit that round and we say the slot length, let's say, is 75, you will see that it will slot them distances. But if we go 50, you can see that it will slot the plate in the horizontal direction. If we change it to vertical, swaps it round, and we could go with a 35mm slot option. And we can also change that whether we can actually change the slot to be in the main beam. You'll see that it is slotted in there. If I increase it up, you can see that it's 50, probably too much. So we could slot both, let's say a 20mm slot there, and we could do actually all components. So we could slot both the plate and the beam. But in this instance I'm going to tick that to none. And then we explore the stiffener tab. So the stiffener allows us to add in some stiffeners, and you can tick stiffener 1. You'll see this will be a stiffener at the top, so it can go that we want a full stiffener, and that will apply it in both sides. If we just go with the half, We can go with full, or we can go with none. So if we want with a full stiffener in that position, and then we may want to stiffen down, let's say, or up the rafter at that point, so that will stiffen it where the haunch comes in. And then we've got stiffener 3, so we can go again with a full there, and then a stiffener at that position. So we can stiffen at the 3 main points and then the 4th point of the rafter, and then with each one we can justify whether it's centered one side or standard. We can also go in and start looking at the corner finish of the stiffeners. So various different options where we can concave, convex, and this will change the corner finish on the stiffener. So if we said that was concave, or we go none, it won't stiffen, or we can just go with a standard straight, and then with each one we can specify a size. And this is getting a little bit, we have some things called Morrow Stiffness, and you can see that the tab is grayed out. And that will be because we need to activate that option in a different tab, and you'll see under the standard stiffener I've got a Morris option. So if I take that on, that should then activate, and you'll see the stiffener configuration has changed, and I can now click into the Morris stiffener, and I can say there's a width, let's say, of 75 and a depth of 150, and you'll see it will start to stiffen like that. And what I would do in this instance is to turn off stiffener 3, so you can start to stiffen in that type of configuration. But again, I'm going to just go with standard, sets it back, and then I can go with a full stiffener in that position, and I'm also stiffening up the rafter. We also have the ability to put in a web doubler, and again the value is grayed out, and that will be because we need to set the various options. So if you go to web doubler, it then activates the option. You can see I've stiffened in on the web, where you can specify a value, you can specify between. So if we said the width was 100 and the height, let's say 75, it puts a little stiffener in. But again, if I go back just to a standard stiffener, again we have sloped stiffeners. Again, it's controlled for the stiffener type. So if we say sloped, you see that we can stiffen in that direction, and then you go to your various tab, and then you set the difference. So whether top to bottom, bottom to top, swaps it around, and then you've got the changes for the thickness, type, values. And then we have the ability to create extra little stiffeners in these locations. So if I was to set my stiffener back to stiffener 1 and put it to standard, so I can actually stiffen in at the location of the bolt, but I'd have to shift my bolts down. So if I go to stiffeners 2, you can see that you specify the distance. So if we said that distance from the top was 100, let's say 75, we should be able to find it in the middle, and we can stiffen in accordingly in them positions, and then you can control the size, the length, and the height. But again, not going to require it in this connection. Then we have upper stiffeners. So if we want to put an upper stiffener on the top of the rafter, so we can stiffen in there, and we can create a stiffener on the upper side of the column as well. And again, with each one you've got the different values, and then we can control the stiffener widths on each one. So you've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So lots of different controls. Again, I'm going to set this back to upper stiffeners, take that off, and again tick it off on the column. So if we go back to our stiffeners 1, and I'm probably not going to put that one in and not that one. So I'm just going to stiffen at them 2 points, and that basically is my connection added. So once I've got it added one side, I can then go to the Tools tab and use the Joint Copy option. So this is Joint Copy. It prompts me to select a connection part, so I'm going to select the haunch, right click, and then I input it using my connection order, which is select the column first, right click, then select the rafter, and then I right click, and that will copy the same joint configuration on one side over to the other side. So hopefully that explains a little bit more about the haunch connection. So join me again soon for another video on Autodesk Advanced Steel.